Omniagruzio is a mass deck that many players have maybe forgotten by now. Kind of funny to think of it that way, considering that when it was released, there was a lot of doom posting thinking that the mechanic of lowering your opponent's shield or their trigger power is going to utterly destroy Vanguard. But here we are, Omniagruzio being a basically forgotten deck that's seen zero play, even a set after it's been released. But I actually really like the deck and it's pretty fun, and I think it's actually still pretty decent. Here's a list that I'm going to be running today. Let's jump into it. So this took a good while to actually get this game started, but here we are, finally playing Omniagruzio. They've supposedly updated the, I don't want to say netcode, but the matchmaking for the game, so it's a little bit easier to find games. And I did find games a little bit easier after this, right? But we're going up against a Youthberg. I guess they saw the episode and were excited about it, so they're trying the deck here in Dear Days. My hand is looking like alright, you know. I managed to win the dice roll and decided to go second because I am playing a max deck. Of course, I benefit the most from going second, which is part of the reason why this deck is still kind of viable in my opinion, is that just about every other deck likes to go first. So you basically always get your preferred option. And also, obviously, you now get to choose, actually, right? Before, when this deck was around, you couldn't choose whether you go first or second. And the other good thing about this deck is that it doesn't use any counter blasts early, so guarding early is actually not detrimental to the deck in any way, shape, or form, right? And you actually want your triggers in drop as well, so it's alright. So the main game plan with this deck is, of course, it's a mass deck, so you want to ride the original version and then go to Omniagruzio Mask. They both share an effect that allow them to, based on the triggers that you have in your bind zone, you can affect your opponent's triggers during your turn. So what that means is that I can, on the basic Omniagruzio, I can make it so that my opponent doesn't get any trigger power when they damage check a trigger. So if I attack them and I use my effect, or if I had to use my effect in main phase and I attack them and they check a defensive crit, they don't get the power, which is like really strong, right? Like that's really good, because there's a lot of times, like, think back to any of the games you've had recently, think back to how a single defensive turned off the, you know, entire turn or whatever the case may be, right? And completely swung the game. Omniagruzio makes it so that doesn't happen. On top of that, the mask version has an added effect that says, in addition to that, your opponent's triggers lose 5k shield, right? So based on all of the trigger icons that I have in my bind zone, if any of those triggers match and my opponent tries to either guard with that trigger, they lose 5k shield, or if they damage check that trigger, they lose the power. So it just makes it kind of really difficult for the opponent to guard, especially like if you're not used to playing the deck. Like, the deck started to fall off a little bit even immediately after it came out, because people kind of figured out, you know, understood what it is that you have to do against this deck, or at least how to think about guarding differently. Nowadays, there's not really anything that does what Omniagruzio does, right? So I feel like you can catch a lot of people off guard, especially in Dear Days maybe, right? Because I'm in like baby mode. I'm in like silver or something like that, so I'm not fighting like the cream of the crop. No offense to my opponents, right? But I'm just fighting random people, right? And they probably haven't even seen Omniagruzio since God knows when. So it makes it a lot more difficult for them to guard. My hand here is kind of yucky, right? Because I have a bunch of stuff here. And what I like to do with this deck is I like to guard early, because I know I'm going to go second and I'm going to have a bunch of counter blasts thanks to my opponent just going off on their first grade 3 turn. And it allows me to put my triggers in drop so that I can then bind them with my Omniagruzio effects. It also makes it so that my very important pieces don't go into the damage zone, or also my important pieces that I need to, maybe not even need, but that allow my effects to actually plus when it comes to like deck thinning. That isn't the case here, as you can immediately see Omniagruzio go to damage, and then my Misery Wind, which is my main attacker, right? That's like the most important card for the deck here. And I was actually, I think in this specific fight, I was using 2 Omniagruzio in the main deck, and I instantly just went back up to 3. I had cut it out for some space, but I took out the Prospector, and put that down to 3 instead. But Omniagruzio's mechanic also counts for the over trigger, which is why I went ahead and I guarded with that here. Also, I didn't really have any other guarding options, but I have the added benefit of, even though I drew into the over trigger, I can guard with here, block this attack, and then I can remove the over trigger so that if they check the over trigger defensively, they don't get the 100 million power, right? They get all of the effects of the trigger. So if it's a draw trigger, you still draw. If it's a heal and you can heal, you still heal. It doesn't turn that off. It just turns the power. And the shield, if you try to guard with it, it just makes it minus 5k, which hurts a lot. It hurt a lot more before because a lot of people were using draw triggers, the effect draw triggers, whereas like now they're using, basically every deck uses the effect fronts, right? But you can see even more of my pieces as my last Omniagruzio mask goes into damage, and then what should be my last normal Omniagruzio goes into damage. I still have the right deck one at least, but yeah, I have to make the tough choice here to discard the Rune Collector, which is a good card for the deck that makes the deck work a lot better because while it does limit what your opponent can do, it does have offensive capabilities too, right? So on ride, I can search for top 5, either an Omniagruzio or a mask, which is nice, so it instantly lets me get access to the mask. Before you'd play a lot of copies of the mask and not playing the mask searchers and just kind of rely on that. And you also had to do this thing where you would constantly re-ride, which was pretty cool. You would ride the original Omniagruzio, so you can use its effect to bind a trigger. Then you would persona ride or use the mask effect to go into the mask version and then bind another trigger. And then you would do that same thing next turn, so you can then have 4 triggers bound, basically every trigger type, in your bind zone, right? And that's typically what you would do. But you don't have to do that anymore. Okay, I guess I was playing 3 here. Okay, so I guess before this fight, never mind. So I saw that I had 3 in drop there, and I was able to bind 1. But you don't have to do that anymore, right? Because of this card here, which is the main support card the card has got. The deck got support in set 4 of Divines, and then again in set 8 in Divines. None of those cards even match up to its first and technically second wave of support with the Wolf Girl here, because she says if you're on the mask, you can CB1 like a top 5, call anything, you know, grade less than equal to Vanguard, and then you can bind a trigger from your drop. So that means you don't have to constantly keep rewriting your Vanguard in order to just get the bind, the cards, the triggers, I should say, in bind, right? So I was able to call out the Midry Wing, who's really great because it allows you to Soul Blast 2. Soul Blast 2 is really good because it allows me to get my Omniagruzio ride deck grade 3 out of my soul, so I can then remove it. But I can Soul Blast 2 draw, and he gets 5k, I think, for every different trigger icon in my bind zone. So he's just the big beater. My Vanguard has the effect, specifically Omniagruzio Mask, that after the battle that it attacks, you can counterblast 1, put 2 rear guards into soul to restand it, attack again, -1 drive. So I have a restanding Vanguard on top of reducing my opponent's shield, which is part of what makes this deck really good, because it kind of is like, it does a lot of good things that work for it, right? I have a lot of deck thinning, so my drive checks are good. I reduce shield power, and also I don't get turned off by defensives. My rear guards can get kind of beefy because they give themselves power, and then I have Persona Ride on top of that. And then I also have 3 drive checks in a turn. The Rune Collector that I had to discard for Ride that was behind my Vanguard, it also has an effect that it counts as 2 cards whenever it goes into the soul by your Vanguard's effect, which is really nice, so you don't have to constantly lose out on an advantage, right? And you have easy ways to get him out from soul and kind of recycle him. But overall, this is basically the same deck list as it was when it released. The only thing that I've added is, well, okay, maybe not entirely. I've added 3 cards technically, right? Because I've added in the Tizark, right, which I just don't see in this entire game, but I've added in the Tizark, which is, you can use for discarding for ride, so that's nice. Before you're playing Lamenia, now you don't have to do that. You can actually use a bit more of your soul with stuff like the Dragon Tree Wrench, which is also really good in this deck. There's the Wolf Girl, Lindica, who's really good for the deck. She's actually good for any mask deck, so you can actually play her in Greed on Mask, and I've seen her some playing Greed on Mask, and she can actually be played in Almagester, Astroya, right? Because that also binds the crit in that deck too, which is really good. But she doesn't actually see play because you have Bifrons and don't really have space for anything else, right? But there's those 2, and then there's, you know, speaking of Astroya, there's the promo, the Plutonic Prospector, which I have behind the rear guard here on the right side here. He's also really good. He's a promo that just says that when he attacks your boost, you can put him into Soul. Like the top 7, choose a grade 3, add it to your hand, right? Which is great because his deck focuses on grade 3s. It has so many grade 3s, right? Because I have the mask, I have the mask version, and I have to play the normal version in main deck, right? So that's like what? I play 4, 3, and 3. So that is 10 grade 3s, right? It also gives itself 15k shield. I think if it becomes 15k shield because it gets plus 10k shield depending on what you have. I think either your Vanguard or your Bind Zone, one of those two. But those are literally the only 3 cards that have been added to this deck to, you know, update it. But there are some other things you can mess around with, like the Bifrons maybe or something like that. But honestly, just playing the same deck as before, slapping on the new Wolf Girl, the promo, and then the Tizark for discard, it makes a deck, you know, in my opinion, catch up and work all right with the decks nowadays. The thing that it needs in the future, really, because this deck already kind of did everything, right? Even on launch, it was already like, it was sort of like Gandiva level in terms of like its first wave gave it everything that the deck needed, right? It was kind of on that level. And it still had like other options that you can play. Like I'm playing the Dragon Tree Wrench here from set 9 because it allows me to get a Dragon Tree marker, which is, you know, alright, whatever. I can get 5k or something. But in addition to that, I can also Soul Blast 2, call a grade 1 from my Soul in the same column. So I can call a Rune Collector and reuse it. I can call something like the Gem Cat and use that from the Soul if I wanted to, right? If that ends up in your Soul. So you have a lot of different options that you can play. You can play like the Greedon grade 1. What is, I was gonna say Immergar, but that's not his name. I've said his name like so many times, but I just haven't used it. But it's the grade 1 that gives you Guard Restrict, right? You can technically play that in this deck, but it's a lot of Counterblast, and this deck is already kind of Counterblast heavy to an extent. It has enough Counterblast where it's fine. If it had like an in-engine Counter Charger, I guess that would be fine, but we just don't have the space to play stuff, right? Because I'm playing like 3s of certain cards just to make space for everything, unfortunately, right? And this deck was also something that really benefited from the 4 cards main deck upgrade, I can tell you that much, but I never saw really any play after that, unfortunately. But what it really needs, if it got some support, aside from like maybe a counter charge, which again I don't know if it really needs, is some sort of early gameplay aside from the Prospector, because right now it's just Prospector and that's it. You can just Prospector, thin out your Soul, your deck, and that's it. We'll go here to game 2. I realize I've just been blabbing. I haven't really been commenting on the game, but this game is kind of funny, so. But yeah, we need something that you can use in the early game to either protect yourself or just not get immediately blown out, essentially, right? It just needs some way to stabilize other than just a Ride Cycler. Maybe the Gay Cyclers that we get in set 7, maybe, but it uses Soul, so probably not. So the last game here, our opponent was not able to Persona Ride, and we were just close out the game with some good drive checks here. This one is going to be a bit interesting. I almost felt like cutting this game out, but it'll be fine, right? So first things first, we have to play that game that we used to play with Stoicheia, but now we get to play with Lyrical, where it's, what deck is this? Because they play all these generic cards, and I literally have no idea what this deck could be, right? They discard the Steglia, which can be played in like, you know, so many decks, right? Unfortunately for them, they are going to have what I assume is their single copy of Crossing Luminaries, the Willister Order, go into damage on their first turn, which is absolutely tragic. You hate to see when that happens. They discard the Eureka, still no information. They decide to not use the effect of Willister because, I mean, it's in damage. I'm assuming they only had 1. They throw the Steglia anyways, and then they have the Eileen here. Again, giving me no information. This could literally be Kyrie for all I know, right? So I go ahead and I block this attack. They decide to put the card on top of the deck. I actually caught it this time, right? They put the card on top of the deck, and I was like, oh, unless it's an OT, if it's a crit, I can very easily guard it with this front, which I can then bind, turn off the front if they play it. God knows if they play it, because I don't know what they're playing. But it ends up being a crit, so they check a crit here. Okay. But I managed to go ahead and guard that. So, you know, again, I don't really need Counterblast early, so I have the luxury of being able to guard and still kind of do my thing. So I'm just gonna ride up here, going to the bird. This is Omnia Owl. This allows me to take a trigger from my deck, but it's my soul draw 1. So typically I take the 1 copy of the draw trigger that I play, put that into soul, and then I draw from it anyways. So it's kind of like I use the trigger effect anyways. But in this case, I decided to be risky and pick a heal, which may or may not hurt me in the end. You'll see. Put the heal because I already have access to all my other triggers, right? I have the front, I have the draw, and I have a crit and drop. And now I have another crit that I check here in order to break through my opponent's defensive. I'm at 0 damage. I push them here to 3 damage instantly and making them lose a card, except Psych, because they have the over trigger that they're going to check here. I'm going to go ahead and use my Prospector, and I'm going to be able to grab my Omniagruzio, grade 3. The base 1 here, which is nice, so I can discard that for right next turn if I need to, right? And then just remove it from drop to for the cost of the mask cost of the mask effect, right? But it turns out here they're actually playing Chris Rain, which still doesn't give me enough information, ironically, because there are some decks that play Chris Rain main deck and they use the divine skill, and then they ride a completely different other Vanguard. So that might even be the case that's happening here. Who knows, right? But I won't be able to find out until like they end up riding something else. So it looks like a typical Chris Rain turn here. They have here the French at pink, which unfortunately I think this was a misplay on their part. Either they forgot or they didn't mean to do that. But they attack with the French at pink first. You know, give her effect to get 30k. I'm thinking I'm just gonna have to take the Vanguard swing, so I'm just gonna guard all these other attacks. So I go ahead and slap down 2 triggers here for the 40, and then the French at pink is that in the battle it allows you to bounce something, which they probably would have liked to use the Eileen, but they end up bouncing it instead. So they probably meant to attack in a different attack pattern. Luckily for them, I guarded, so there was no defensive that was checked, but I end up taking the Stegi attack, which I probably could have guarded, and I probably should have in hindsight. But they're gonna go ahead here and use their weird guard restrict that lets you have to guard with like 3 or more cards of like different grades or something like that, or different names, or just use a PG. But I just end up taking this attack. I can't really guard it anyways. They can't divine skill because I'm on grade 2. They do have the crit, so this is going to instantly push me to 3, but I'm like, it's okay. I really only need max 2 counterblasts. Technically only 1, but I can use 2 counterblasts. I'll have the extra one in case I need it. Here, I actually get the Tizark, and instead of discarding the Omniagruzio, I decide, yeah, let me draw a card. Hand is looking kind of shoddy here. Let's go ahead and use that effect to draw a card here. Use the effect of Omniagruzio on ride. I managed to get the mask off the top 5, which is really good. I already had one in drop, but it's nice to get it. And then I drew the mask version as well. So I went super great, didn't get any triggers. So I can actually try and check those. I go ahead and I bind the crit, because that's usually the first one you go for, because your opponent's always going to be playing crits. Then I go ahead and go into the mask. Ride into Omniagruzio mask here, draw into the Dragon Tree Wrench, play the order, and I still get a target, which is kind of nice because I have like no hits left in deck, but I play the mask and I managed to get Omniagruzio mask. Then I play Lemme here, counterblasting 1, looking at the top 5, able to unfortunately only get the Omniagruzio mask base, but that's fine. I bind the draw trigger. I don't know which one of the 2 they're playing, even though I just saw them check a front, but I completely forgot about it, but it's fine. I play the other Linica because I have the counterblast here, and I call out my Misery Wing off the top 5 there, and then this time I bind the heal trigger that I put in my soul like a dunce, right? From out of my deck. And here I'm going to go ahead and Soul Blast 2 in order to draw 1. I think in the previous game I misplayed where I soul charged a heal with Rune Collector, and I didn't Soul Blast it out, and I could have bound it and had, you know, an extra trigger icon, but it's whatever. I finally used the mask effect here and then finally bind the front that I know they have. I go ahead and I play the Dragon Tree Wrench, and then since I don't have Rune Collector, I have to basically attack to get the most value with the Lindica column here, boosted by the Wrench. With 38, pretty good numbers. They don't check a defensive, they lose Persona Ride, which is good for me. Then I swing in with the Vanguard here, unboosted. Unfortunately, but it doesn't entirely matter because they're going to go ahead and drop a PG here, drop a heal trigger, which is only going to be 10k shield, which is nice. I'm going to go ahead and unfortunately only get the Tizark and then essentially a brick, right? I have all these grade 3s in my hand, so definitely discarding the Tizark for ride was nice, but it didn't end up really mattering that much, right? We're going to go ahead and use the Vanguard skill, put my back row Lindica and then the wrench that I boosted with already into soul in order to swing in here. They have yet another PG here for the Vanguard swing, so I'm like, oh damn. Granted, I can't win the game here because I only have 1 drive, but they probably aren't going to be able to guard my Misery Wing attack, but unfortunately I do manage to heal, but it wasn't like something more damaging like a crit, right? But the heal is nice, right? So that puts me back down to 2, and I swing with my 50k Misery Wing, right? Just smack him because I have 4 triggers, so he's plus 20, plus the Persona Ride, plus the trigger, right? And past turn, thinking like, you know, I should be okay here. If they Persona Ride, I'm in danger, but they don't. They go ahead and Energy Blast 7 here to draw. Initially, I thought like, oh, they fucked themselves. They can't use Chris Rain's skill, thinking that it was, or they can't use the booster skill, forgetting about Chris Rain's skill is what I mean to say, right? But they do use Chris Rain's skill. They get the energy charge back. They get their crit. They give the power to French Epic, who then gives the power right back, essentially, to the Chris Raid here. And I'm thinking like, well, that's kind of spoopy. And they're probably gonna Divine Skill here, because why would they not? They only have 3 cards, right? So I'm like, all right, let's go ahead and use his arc here and see what I can get, because I can easily go ahead and guard with the Lindica, because she's on place, and then I can call something else, you know, assuming I Persona Ride or something like that next turn, whatever. And then I'm thinking I'm probably gonna have to take the Vanguard swing and then use whatever I have left to guard whatever rear guard they call out, right? Hopefully have enough. So I decided to use the cat here, which was kind of whatever, because it only goes up to 33. So I could have guarded with the Misery Wing to make it 38, but I decided to just drop a heal trigger here, and I was like, it's all right. I have, you know, like 3 triggers I think in my hand at this point. I think I'll be okay. So the Vanguard comes in here, and they use, of course, their effect here to Energy Blast. I see they don't really check out. They haven't really checked a lot of triggers yet, but I was like, all right, it's okay. I have to take this. I'm at 2. Critical trigger comes in. I'm like, all right, that's kind of spoopy. That's 3 damage. I can go to 5. That's okay. Critical trigger comes in, and I'm just like, ah, crap. I guess I'm going to fucking 6 and 9 here. So had I maybe kept that heal in deck, I might have checked it here. I might have checked it here. I might have checked it here where it would have actually mattered. Or I might have checked it here where it actually mattered, but I got 4 blanks in a row. So with that, let's go into game 3 here. Quick little game 3 here. Kind of showed off what the deck does. And for those that have either played against the deck or played the deck when it came out, it unfortunately really has not changed. You know, the game plan is exactly the same, which is partly why I guess I haven't talked about it, but also just because I've just been yapping. Sometimes I yap. I'm sorry. I tend to be a yapper. I'm a closet yapper. I yap a lot sometimes, right? We're actually playing against here Charmot, which is interesting. Or Charmet. I think Charmet is the Levy Dress card. Charmot is the lyrical card, right? It doesn't help that they both have L's in their associations. But again, I managed to go second. I actually lost to Dyro by my opponent, because whatever deck they are wants to go first. Usually they decide to give me second. I use the skill of my Omnia Owl here, or my Omnia Crow, to look at top 5 for, I think it's Omniagruzio that it searches for, but unfortunately I whiff and I soul charge 2, in which case I soul charge I think an Omniagruzio Mask, which is a bit unfortunate. But I managed to check a crit here on their no guard, which is nice, and they lose a Persona Ride here, which is good for me. They're going to go ahead and ride here. They actually discard the Rhesus, which is kind of nuts here, because that's super important. So I'm curious to see what their hand would have been to decide to do that. But they're going to call out the starter here and then call out the Aura. And I'm just like, you know, my usual strategy. I don't want any of my pieces to go to damage, because they are going to, and there's a lot of pieces. And I don't need counterblast, especially considering I'm going second right now, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and guard the rear guard swing. Bit of an overguard, but I really don't have any other options other than pitching the Lindica. And then I guard with a crit here, even though it is one to pass with the Aura. I don't want them to get an order. Doesn't matter, they give me the receipt back for the crit that I hit them with last turn. Except they make me waste a crit in hand. I could have just, I guess, not tried to gatekeep their Aura or whatever, but they, yeah. They're going to go ahead and push me to 2. I'm going to check a heal, but it doesn't matter, because they're also at 2, or they were at 2 when I checked it and I was at 1, right? Would have been great otherwise, because then I could have healed out the Omniagruzio. That just went into damage, but oh well. As I draw yet another Omniagruzio, which is a bit unfortunate. We're going to instantly discard that, so we can use that for later, and then ride into Omnia Owls here, who's the one that I said before, I should say. Lets me put a card from a trigger from deck to soul, and then draw 1. Typical target for this is the draw trigger, which you play 1 copy of, just so you can cover all of your trigger types, right? they're going to not get crit sacked here, right? Second time in a row. But I am going to get the Tizark to hand, which is kind of nice, so I can hopefully use that to discard for next turn. As, you know, those that don't know, Shortmouth is kind of nuts with its power here. So they're going to call out the new girl here, the new elf girl. Who's EB3, call out a card from your soul, and then you can Soul Blast one after that to give the Vanguard 5k. I wish it was kind of the other way around, because sometimes you don't want to call something out from soul, but you have to call something out from soul in order to then Soul Blast and give 5k. I really wish they had switched that around, but I guess then it would have been playable in other decks, which might have been an issue, but like I wouldn't really care. They're going to use the Vanguard Seal to call stuff out, and they do have the Reese's here, which is interesting because you can't boost the Vanguard at all for Charma to go off. So they do this sort of pattern here with the grade 2 in the front row, which is kind of interesting. But that makes a massive column on that side. I decided to just take the Vanguard swing here because like I have these other massive attacks to deal with. Thankfully, they don't check anything. So I'm A-okay here, right? Even if I take the rest of these attacks, I don't lose the game. And they don't have drive checks this turn because they have to go second to get drive checks. I get a defensive crit, which is really nice because it allows me to soak up these hits a little easier. Except Psych, because that's a 33k booster in the back row. So I'm just going to have to take this 40-3 while I'm on grade 2. Which is then going to give me yet another defensive, which is kind of nice. Kind of wish I didn't have all these rainbow triggers in damage and maybe in drop instead. But they're going to swing it here with this massive 66. And I was actually 1k short, technically 2k short of guarding this, so I just end up using my PG, discarding the crit, just so I don't go to 5 here. They are going to use the effect here of the grade 1 to put that whole column into soul, which makes sense. They can call it the grade 2 afterwards on their following turn, and they don't need to their knowledge, I have no way to retire, even though I could have, right? I could have easily busted out the clean sweep dragon, but they kept the grade 0 there, right? Otherwise their whole game plan would be kind of hosed, unless they called it from drop, which they can't, so they have to put it into soul and then call it from soul, right? Which I guess they can do. But yeah, I managed to discard the Tizark for right, and then go through the whole motions here, right? Use Omniagruzio to bind the crits, then use the effect of the mask to go into Omniagruzio mask. Then I go ahead and Persona Ride. I once again draw into the mask, but again it whiffs. It's like the third game that's happened, or second game, right? And then we have the Linka here, so we can go ahead and Counter Blast 1. We get the Misery Wing off of it, so everything is just coming up daisies here. But I don't have a lot of triggers, which is the only issue, so we're going to go ahead and bind the Draw trigger, or a lot of variety in trigger types, right? We're going to Soul Blast 2 here, and then we're going to go ahead and draw. I always Soul Blast the Ride line in case I have the cat, in case I need to, you know, counter charge or something like that. I'm going to play the Rune Collector and Soul Charge. I typically don't Soul Charge for whatever reason today. I felt like Soul Charging was a good idea. It had failed me every single time because it had been a bad option. So then we're going to go ahead and play a Misery Wing here again from hand. Soul Blast 2, draw, get into the Elementar, which is really nice to have, especially against this deck here. And swinging with the Vanguard, boosted by the Rune Collector. We are going to get the heal trigger, which is really nice, because we can heal that face down card, which happens to be Omniagruzio as well. But we also get a critical trigger here, right? I gave the heal power to my Vanguard, but I'm going to give the crit to my Vanguard, and then the crit power to my rearguard here. In case they check 2 defensives after this, which they don't, but of course I turn off defensive, but in case it was like a front trigger that they had checked, right? Or a heal, because I didn't happen to turn those off. I swing in here again with the Vanguard, and then they have to guard with all these cards here, because, you know, the crits do end up losing 5k shield, so that did possibly hurt them here quite a bit here, as I go and I swing in here with my weaker Misery Wing, but they're just not able to guard it here, and that is going to be the game. Hope you guys enjoyed this style of video. I'll see if I can keep doing these in the future. Till next time, take care of yourselves and each other, play Vanguard, and have yourselves a damn good one.